Number 6, Fox.Dude says, do you think Martin Luther went to heaven despite the fact that he had a hatred towards Jews and was unrepentant? I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that question. Fox.Dude, I don't think I'm qualified. I'll talk for briefly about Martin Luther and his issues, but you have to understand, like, here's somebody who professes Christ and then has this like horrible attitude and maybe even some actions, I'm not sure about that, towards Jewish people that strikes of bitterness and hatred and anger, and that some of his later writings that were just like atrocious, and you're like, that's so unchristian. But now here's me, hundreds of years later, I know this little about him, and I'm gonna determine whether he's in heaven or hell. Like, I just think I'm being unwise here. I'm not gonna comment. But Martin Luther, for those who don't know, the guy that nailed the 95 Thesis to the door of the church in Wittenberg, the man who ate a diet of worms. That's a joke. That's not true. He wrote early on about how he was very hopeful about the Jews coming to the knowledge of the Messiah. But later on in his life, I think through altercations and problems he had with Jewish communities, and there was tons of tension on both sides. Okay, it's not all one-sided, but it's on both sides between Jews and Catholics, Jews and Christians, and the Catholic Church historically had been extremely anti-Semitic. That's just reality, right? Like, how many of the first people, the first people I'm aware of that were requiring Jews to wear a sign to show that they were Jewish was the popes. So it's like, go read the papal bulls. How many of them are about Jewish people? It's just creepy. All that being said, later on in his life, Luther got like really bitter and angry and mean-hearted towards Jewish people, and he wrote at one infamous letter. He wrote something about like how he thought their synagogue should be destroyed and all this kind of thing. And there's two things led to this. One is anti-Semitism in general. Another was a general view that the Catholics and the Reformation had. This is key to understand this, that religious laws should be enforced even to the torturing, or I should say the punishment or destroying of other religions. Like, this was something that they felt they were supposed to do, to root out heresy and not allow there to be a freedom of thought and freedom of religion. This is not a value that they had. Any of them had back then historically. It's just not a value anyone has. At least that's my understanding of things. Hopefully it's accurate. That being said, what we look at as specifically anti-Semitism is couched in an environment where they were like, wait, you believe that we shouldn't baptize babies? We're gonna outlaw you, chase you down, kick you out, even hang or drown some of you. And you're like, what? Okay, this was a view, sacralism, or the religious control and enforcement of religion through the power of police, that most of us would reject nowadays. And may I say, was not the case in the early church. Right? This is a cultural thing affecting these different believers. It is not something that rises naturally from Christianity, where Jesus just says, if they reject you, just shake the dust off your feet. If they reject you, just go to another town, go somewhere else. If they reject you, that's their choice. You stay true to me. My kingdom is not of this world, otherwise my servants would take up swords and fight, Jesus says, right? So that's Jesus. That's the New Testament. That's not the culture Martin Luther was in, and he didn't reform enough in that regard. So, yeah, really shameful stuff. But I'm not a follower of Martin Luther. I agree with him on some things, but I'm not his follower.